So once again, welcome everyone to our webinar, Inclusive Education in Latin America and the Caribbean, Meaningful Learning for All. We invite you to introduce yourselves in the chat. Please, if you can share with us your location, your organizational affiliation, and why you decided to join this event, that would be great. Bienvenidos, bienvenidas a todos, bienvenue à tout le monde. Alors, so I would just like you to remind you that this event is being recorded. Thank you. And before we get started, I have a few reminders to share with you. First, auto-closed captioning is available in English. Please click the CC icon to access this feature. You can also click on the globe icon to access interpretation in Spanish and French. Please use the chat feature to add comments and questions whenever you like. If you haven't already done so, please introduce yourselves. Also, just to preserve the bandwidth, we ask that during the plenary session, you mute yourselves, your microphones, and turn off your cameras when you are not speaking. So our speakers today will present the findings of an inclusive education landscape assessment in service of our main objectives, which are, first, to build awareness on issues of who is left out of education data, reporting, and activities. Second, to gain knowledge to influence the design and implementation of inclusive education activities. And third, to provide a space for conversation on these findings. The structure of our event today is a brief introduction of the inclusive education landscape assessment, followed by a dialogue between two of the researchers of this study. They will provide detailed information that respond to the 6 research questions of this study. Finally, please note that we will be referring to EMIS, which are the Education Management Information System, and in Spanish, it will be translated as SIGET, Sistema de Información y Gestión Educativa. Just whenever you hear that, well, now you know that you'll be hearing that throughout the presentation. We now welcome our speakers, Nate Haidt, who is the Education Advisor with the USAID LAC Bureau, Carla Paredes, Deputy Director at DevTech Systems, Jose Pineda, Director of Education, Gender and Youth at DevTech Systems. Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'll now hand it over to Nate to begin with today's presentation.
Thank you very much, Mariana. Thank you to the USAID Center for Education's Leading Through Learning global platform, specifically the LAC Hub, for hosting this webinar. Thank you to the DevTech team, as well as the regional and local researchers from each of the 4 countries in this study for their work on this assessment. And thanks to all of you for joining us today. I'm going to provide a brief introduction and some background for the presentation. From a Latin America Caribbean education trends analysis we commissioned in 2022 at USAID with DevTech, we noted clear gaps in the data around access and quality of education for marginalized and vulnerable groups. We were also inspired by the UNESCO Global Education Monitoring Report in 2020 that states that LAC remains the most unequal region in the world, according to key socioeconomic factors. As a follow-up study with DevTech, we commissioned the LAC Inclusive Education Landscape Assessment. We refer to it as IELA or IELA, to start to fill some of the gaps in the data and better understand barriers to inclusive education, inform our work moving forward. At USAID, if we could go back one slide, please. Thank you. At USAID, inclusive education refers to a system of education accompanied by policies and practices that aims to ensure equal opportunities for all, regardless of their background or abilities. While inclusive education sometimes refers specifically to inclusion for learners with disabilities, we're referring more broadly to inclusion for learners from various marginalized and vulnerable groups. Based on funding available for this study, USAID LAC missions interest, and a preliminary review of data available, we were able to select 4 countries for this study: Colombia, Haiti, El Salvador, and Honduras, which range from Central America to the Caribbean and South America. After reviewing data and discussing further with our colleagues in each mission at USAID, we prioritized seeking data for 3 marginalized groups in each country. You'll see there's some overlap and some different groups in each of the 4 countries that will be presented today. You can see that across the 4 countries, we have findings for these 6 groups listed on the slide. I'm looking forward to a great discussion today on the findings of this assessment. The final report for this assessment will be ready in the coming weeks. We do not have it ready just yet. It will be posted on USAID education links. With that, I will now pass it over to Carla and Jose from DevTech. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Nate. Y gracias a todos los participantes de la región que están sintonizados para escuchar los hallazgos de este estudio. I want to start by recognizing the magnitude of this effort. And as Nate said, the invaluable contributions of our local team leads. I would like to thank them by name: Mariano Loset from Honduras, Fabiola Lopez from Haiti, Paulina Arango from Colombia, and Pauline Martin, I saw she's here, from El Salvador. Thank you to you and your teams for the extensive hours and research and effort put into the study, as well as our regional effort, our regional teams. To do this a little bit more interactive, we're going to use a conversation format, and you will see Jose and I interact and talk about the slides. So here we go. Some mixed news on the education from LAC. The Ayala report showed some progress in education data tracking in LAC. Governments in the 4 countries track data for marginalized children, including children living with disabilities, including children in the poorest quintiles and children in rural areas. Now, information is not consistently available every year, and information is also limited in terms of learning outcomes for vulnerable populations. To talk more about what the Ayala found is DevTech's Education Director, Jose Pineda, who worked with me and the team of local and regional experts. So, Dr. Pineda, welcome.
Thank you, Carla.
Jose, let's share with the audience very briefly a little bit about the methodology, the report, the case studies, the participants, etc.
Great. Well, the Yale study employed a mixed method research approach. The idea was that we work in 2 levels. First, we did a broad overview of the main trends on inclusive education across the 4 countries. Also, we went on the second part of the study on a country-level case studies. As Nate already shared with the audience, the study involved 4 case studies, and we engaged with key education stakeholders that are associated with the 3 main marginalized groups that were selected by each of the countries. The data was collected used from 271 informants using system in a room sessions, focus group discussions, and key informant interviews. Using this approach, I think help us to capture key stakeholders' perspective on the different policies, the practices, and the different factors affecting inclusive education, and particularly capturing some of the recommendations that could be helping to address these barriers.
Great, thank you. Now let's go into the questions. So the research questions. So tell us a little bit about what we know in terms of access, enrollment, and completion rates for girls, rural children, the poorest children that we've been talking about.
Yes. So what we have done is to, if we can go to that slide, perfect. So what we have done is to understand for these different key marginalized groups that rural children and those that comes from the lowest quintile are the ones that are more likely to be out of school and less likely to complete primary education and in all the 4 countries that we study. I think children from rural areas attending schools are attending schools less than their urban counterparts in a significant way, and this was more prominent in the case of Haiti, where the most recent school attendance data, which is from 2017, shows that almost 74% of rural children attend primary school. When we compare this to the 87.6% of urban children attending a school, we see a significant gap.
Right. So what about children living with disabilities? What is the likelihood of them attending school and learning?
Yes, we have an estimated number of around 90 million of children living with disability in the LAC region. And of those, they have 49%, or they are 49% more likely to never have attended school. And they have a 42%, or they are 42% less likely to attain the foundational reading and numeracy skills that they need to have.
That's quite revealing and quite concerning. Going back to the point about limited data on learning, what do we know about marginalized groups? The YELA notes that the latest comparable and consistent data on learning outcomes is the UNESCO ERCE. This is the Regional Comparative and Explanatory Study for 2019 that takes the assessments at 3rd grade and at 6th grade in some Latin American countries, Haiti not being one of them. But what do we know from the ERCE?
Great. Let me just first talk a little bit about Haiti, and then we can concentrate on the information that is on the slide. For the case of Haiti, as you mentioned, there is no data from the ERCE for them, but we went and found data for 2022 on 6th grade national assessment, and that data shows that students across the board perform better when they are taught on their mother tongue. And also, we found that rural children in rural areas are behind their urban counterparts. This is similar to the trend that we can see on the slide for 6th grader from the ERCE, where children that are learning in a language that is different from their mother tongue, particularly in the case of Colombia and Honduras, are scoring the lowest compared to other marginalized groups. So not only lower than the national average, but lower than any other marginalized group. And for instance, for all countries, I think something that was very, very important is the result that the greatest performance gaps we found was when they belong to the lower socioeconomic status. And just to put an example, learners from the lowest quintile of income perform significantly lower than those in the highest quintile. For example, in the case of Honduras, they perform 11.5% lower. In the case of El Salvador, 15.2%. And for Colombia, that gap is 15.4%. So these are significant gaps, and the trends are very similar when we do the analysis for the 3rd grade.
Right. So that really only confirms what decision makers and donors suspect about marginalization. There's an urgency here to address these issues and trying to help students catch up. So how can these decisions happen without proper data, right? What is the state of education management information systems, the EMIS, in these countries about collecting and tracking data for the most marginalized?
Well, the study found that the capacity of these EMIs vary across countries, although all of them collects data on enrollment numbers by gender or administrative units, let's say province or municipalities or geographical areas, mostly urban, rural. System level performance data like school enrollments or attendance rates is not disaggregated by marginalized groups, most of these systems. And when they are available with a gap of at least 2 years. So these are significant gaps. And in addition, we need to say that comparability across these countries is difficult, mostly because there are differences in the way the data is calculated in the methodologies, but also the sources of the data is slightly different. So comparison is difficult to make.
Okay, so in terms of the stakeholders that responded, like the key informants, we even had some from the Ministry of Education, from the EMIS, that identified barriers to track marginalized students' data on education, the start of the school and classroom, with lack of barriers to basic infrastructure, such as electricity, drinking water, as well as more modern educational tools like tablets, internet, particularly in rural areas. Moreover, there's a problem of short staffing, right, in education offices and schools to consistently track students' progress, input the data, and effectively manage the MAs. What other limitations did the study find?
Yeah, Carla, the study found that one significant problem is that even when data is collected, is not easily accessible. The databases are not publicly available, so you're required to ask a direct request for the Ministry of Education. Just to put some more details, when we did analysis, data for learners with disabilities is not readily available in the case of Colombia and El Salvador when we saw their statistical platforms online. In the case of Honduras and Haiti, when we tested their online education statistical platforms, they were not working at the time. And even the case of El Salvador, where prior some resources were available, they are no longer available. So there are significant challenges here in this area.
I understand. Well, we're going to take a break. Thank you, Jose. And over to you, Mariana.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. So before we continue with the findings of this study, we would like to provide a few minutes for questions. So please feel free to come off mute or raise your hand, or if you have any questions, you can also add them in the chat. So anyone who wants to ask anything to Jose or Carla at this stage? Otherwise, I think we can move forward and leave some questions for the end, if that's okay, Jose. Yeah? Okay, so.
Yes, of course.
Great. So I pass it over to you again.
Okay, Jose, welcome back. In this second part of the session, we want to understand the environment around learning, the ecological system around students from the macro to the micro. What are the policies to promote inclusive education? What is the school doing or not doing? And how are the communities and families also supporting students to attend and to achieve in schools? So let's first start with the policies. The IELA uses a framework. This is based on the World Bank Saber framework to categorize the level of development of the policies, the regulatory framework, the policy environment in each of the 4 countries. This goes from latent to very, very advanced. And based on existing laws, policies, and programs, you could see, through the colors and the level of implementation as well. How are we putting these policies to practice? So, Jose, what can you tell us about the policy framework in each of these countries?
Yeah, Carla. The first thing is that although policies may vary by country, I think each country has tried to enact laws, policies, regulations that mandate equitable access and inclusion and quality of education for all. So that's the first thing that we need to recognize. And the second is that although this in principle sounds good, there is a lack of effective system monitoring and ensuring that these systems are in place and are effective. In the case of El Salvador, Haiti, and Honduras, which are the countries that are, as you see with the color code of the slide, exhibiting more challenges, there is very limited policy integration at the service delivery level. And they have kind of a minimal mechanisms in place for collaboration with non-state actors. Colombia, which we can see for the color code has more green, it displays the stronger coordination, which is led by the Ministry of Education. Still, there are challenges, as we can see, in areas that could help to prevent overlapping efforts. So that's kind of the mixed picture.
Okay, what about the school environment? What barriers did stakeholders identify to prevent marginalized groups from receiving quality education?
Yes, I think the kind of barriers, and we can see many of them on the slide. I think for instance, there are lack of nearby upper or primary or secondary schools, and that if you don't have the school nearby, that's a significant limitation. Schools lack of basic infrastructure like drinking water, electricity, or internet to go to more kind of a modern aids for the supporting the education system. There is lack of adequate didactic materials, and this is particularly true for ethnic minorities, migrants, and internally displaced populations, but also learners living with disabilities. And we also found that there are important concerns about the potential school fees. We have go deeper, and also we found that there are barriers addressing or to help to address specific needs. For instance, there is absence of assistive technologies. We don't have, lack of knowledge of sign language or instruction in language different than the mother tongue, which is affecting learning outcomes. There is lack of content relevance, and there are other aspects that we can go in greater detail in the Q&A, but definitely there are not just big picture things missing, but there are particular details that will affect this marginalized group to receive quality education.
Right. At the school environment, stakeholders also reported enabling factors such as the school meal program, the free tuition, cash transfer programs, and flexible education programs to increase school access, right, and retention. Is there any specific one that you want to share?
Yes, we found in the report, I think, an interesting case for Colombia, where for example, they have created what is called 32 flexible education models that assume teaching learning processes with formal education, but also with schools and semi-schools alternatives. And some of the examples that we can mention here of that we found, for instance, working in secondary schools, Escuela Nueva, Learning Acceleration, and the UNICEF Learning Circle. So these are examples that will support increasing school access and retention for these marginalized groups.
Thank you. Moving into the family and communities, what are the factors that came across more relevantly? There is an issue that consistently the report shows about the interaction between poverty and marginalization by other criteria, the double or the triple intersectionality between poverty and disability, poverty and ruralization, gender, and even mixed within. What did the report find?
Excellent, Carla. I think what is interesting is that as we show and we discussed a few minutes ago, the data was showing lower performance for the poorest kid. And what the system in a room and the key enforcement interview, the qualitative analysis show us is that respondents across all the countries highlighted that a key barrier to education is household poverty. And this has a greater impact in rural areas, in some specific ethnic groups, in migrant families, and families with pregnant adolescent girls. The key message that we received from the participants and their responses were households without resources, it's very difficult for them to make the decision to keep their children at school. Right. The lack of resources will impose significant difficulties on them on paying transportation, uniforms, materials, school supplies, books, all of the typical elements that you need to have for a successful learning process. But also they could have the incentive to send their children to work just because they need to support income and to generate income to support the household, or in the case of many girls, they may even need to drop out of the education system because they need to cover unpaid care at home. So these are significant challenges highlighted by the participants.
Right. Another issue that came across all countries was violence. Unfortunately, it was highly prevalent. How does violence manifest in each of these countries as a critical barrier for marginalized children accessing learning?
Yeah, so all countries mentioned that violence through gangs, armed conflict, or even insecurity is the primary community level obstacle that is affecting both attendance of these marginalized children and their ability to also, when they attend, to really remain in school. The manifestation is slightly different across the countries. For instance, in Colombia, is highlighted that violence and armed conflict, in addition to this household poverty, create this double impact. No? This idea that the interaction between these two factors create that these children from marginalized groups will be more vulnerable to the recruitment by armed groups. There's also a higher likelihood of gender-based violence on these children. In the case of El Salvador, what we found is that the recent, or relatively recent, since March 2022, where the government established the state of exception in response to the increase in homicides in the country, that granted authorities the power to arrest anyone that will be suspect of gang activity. And that also was paired with the suspension of several constitutional rights. And in that element, that was a factor that was highlighted as preventing children to attend schools and to remain at school. In the case of Honduras, I think participants highlighted the increase in insecurity and how that there is a pervasive violence related to high crimes rates, and that is how this is affecting. And in the case of Haiti, as we have seen recently, our interviews and the informants told us that the widespread of gang violence and the recruitment of children by gangs, the weaponization of hunger created a significant targeted for the marginalized groups to be at school. So that's a significant factor across all countries. Well, Carla, I know that particularly myself have been talking a lot about negative factors, but we know also in the report that, like schools, families are also a great influencer and enabler for education. So can you tell us a little bit what the report find regarding these positive influences?
Yeah, absolutely. It came across also in several of these focus group, system in a room discussions, the core role that families play in the transmission of values and value settings as good examples, promoting good behaviors in children, allowing or not allowing technology, guiding food and nutrition, among others, as well as the ensuring emotional and help support. It is the cornerstone of learning. It's at the household. And in El Salvador, in Honduras, for example, the respondents agreed that community organizations also are providing a lot of this enabling environment with after-school programs or services that are tailored for children living with disabilities, for adolescents that are pregnant, and play a key role in keeping them in school. All right,
Great.
here we're going to do another Q&A. So, Mariana.
Yes, let's pause in case. I noticed in the chat that there were some questions that we may want to address now, Mariana.
Yeah, perfect. Yes. I think by this point, we've given you a lot of information already. So I will take some of the questions that were shared in the chat before. Here's one for both of you, Jose and Carla. Also, if someone wants to raise their hands and unmute themselves, that would be very nice to hear your voices too. So the first question is there a possibility interest to monitor out-of-school children in countries other than Honduras? And well, these participants tell us that they have some experiences in Venezuela and some local partners to monitor them. I can probably share two more with you, Jose and Carla, and then you can make a round of answers to this. So, well, here, thank you for your presentation. Did your research look at how much of the variation in results, for example, by SES, is occurring? Oh, sorry, I don't say within the same school versus across different schools with different demographic profiles? So let me repeat this one again. Did your research look at how much of the variation in results, for example, by SES, is occurring within the same schools versus across different schools with different demographic profiles? And from Kerry, what can be done to encourage governments and other data collection partners to disaggregate data more to include marginalized populations? So,
yeah, let me go in order, and Carla, please complement or add anything that I've been missing. But sure. Going to the first one, I think Nate gave a very interesting initial explanation, which is sometimes we need to start from a place, and at that moment we have a limited amount of time and resources. I think the methodology is there to be applicable to any other country in which we could go deeper. I think when the results and the report will be published, people could see how the different pieces that we apply in these countries, how applicable they are in others. I will just mention one thing that is important for two reasons in the case that was mentioned, Venezuela. One is the discussion, the way we implement this in Haiti, for instance, the situation was very turbulent at the time, as you can imagine. So we were very creative in how we could replicate the same kind of methodology, but more in a virtual way, because at the time it was very difficult for us to get people in the same room physically because of security concerns. So in the case of Venezuela, operating also a kind of a USAID project, given the kind of situation with the Maduro regime and how they are perceiving or not USAID activities could be a challenge. In any case, I think the methodology is applicable to any country in the region. The idea is to go in this myth method where we go and collect every possible data. We sometimes go and create the statistics that were not easily available on the EMIs. But in addition to that, I think the engagement with key stakeholders is proved to be kind of at the core of getting most of the substance of what is preventing these children from accessing and high education, high quality education. I will say that in terms of the potential disaggregation of results, I think the level of the data for the ERSE is not allowing in an easy way to do the potential within and between the composition of some of these results. However, I will say that some of the distinctions, particularly when it's geographical, like rural, urban, this is clear in terms of the potential kind of a separation that you could make of the results. I will say that others related to ethnicity or other kind of disabilities could be more difficult to create a disentangle. But in that sense, we may need to go and collect some of the primary data, as we did in the case of Venezuela, where we could respond some of these questions because we went to schools and we were able to discuss a little bit of that. I know Nate has his hand raised, and that's great because he could add to some of the response.
Thanks, Jose. Yeah, on this question about the variation in results, whether it's occurring within the same schools versus across different schools. I know the World Bank has actually done some research on this. I'm going to put in the chat. This is a World Bank blog, and I just pulled a quote from there. They say, beyond the differences among countries, the largest gaps in learning achievements are concentrated within countries, and within countries, the greatest differences occur within the classroom. So it's kind of surprising to me to learn that it's not just by socioeconomic geographies, but within the classroom, we're seeing significant variation. So it actually says in that same blog I posted, about 60% of the variation in scores is within schools, which means within classrooms, given that, so it's a really important point, not only looking at inclusion, of different communities, but inclusion within the schools and the classrooms themselves. Back to you, Jose and Carla.
Well, thank you, Nate. That's very pertinent.
Yeah, I would like to add on the question about the out-of-school learners, that one of the big things, issues that we found across the different countries was the limited cross-referencing of data sets from the different areas, health, education, birth registration, that there is in the countries. And conducting these cross-reference census data could certainly help identify and triangulate which are the children that are out of schools. This could be done within the school system, conducting the census of the children that are in like a certain catchment areas, like the geographic location of communities that are assigned to a certain school, and then triangulate. Honduras uses the Open Data Kit, which is precisely an application to do this, and replicating this in other countries could be something promising to identify the out-of-school children.
Yeah, and there is a comment here from Pauline. Pauline, well, I can read it, or you can also open your microphone.
Sure. I just wanted to mention, good morning, that another consideration is that when we talk about disability, there's just a broad range of disabilities. And so, how that's addressed or the possible resources on hand would vary quite a bit. The same for migration or any other of the characteristics. I also just wanted to address what Carla just mentioned. I think one of the difficulties is of addressing out-of-school children is more of a child protection interest, in that children generally, at least in El Salvador, do not have any kind of social security number or any registered number until you're 18 years of age. You actually exist as a citizen of the country. And so it's very hard to track who is born, where they are. Some may be uncomfortable with that as government control, but you really do not know how many children are in the country because they have no kind of registered number until they're considered adults. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pauline. I need to see if we have. Okay, so we can just, Josefina, I see your questions. We can just address them very briefly before we move to our last research question. Can you please comment on what is the concept of equal access opportunities that underlines research? And probably, Jose, just address the last one, the very last one. Have you studied students attending segregated schools or education opportunities for children in congregate care settings? This is from Jerry. The first one from Josefina Vigil, and this one from Jerry Mendez.
Well, I will go to the last one. I think we in general focus on the particular, let's say, setup and groups that were of interest in each of the countries. So in that sense, we basically times in certain countries address certain issues, but we didn't cover in all the countries all the aspects. So I will say that at least this study at this level didn't address that particular component. And I don't know, Carla, if you have anything to say about the first set of questions.
Perhaps just in terms of the definitions that that we are using, which are based on the definitions, for example, of equality that we have from the same sources from USAID, and is, you know, all members of the group enjoy the same inputs, outputs, outcomes in terms of status and rights and responsibilities versus like equity, the process of like the actions that are aimed of ensuring equality. And perhaps also that also has to do with the definition of quality education as a process that equips students with the critical skills in literacy, numeracy, even socio-emotional competencies that is safe, relevant, evidence-based. Want to just try to tap in if that is where the question was referencing to.
Yeah, I think we can just move on, and Josefina, if you have additional questions, please continue adding them, and everyone in the chat. So I'll pass it over to you again, Carla, to continue with our last research question. And yeah, over to you now. Thank you.
Yeah, so let me keep my asking Carla. So we have discussed a significant set of challenges that the report covered. Some, as we just saw for some of the discussions, that we may not have been covering. But the question that I want to ask you is, what is the international community doing to advance in the quality of education for these marginalized groups? So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So in the 4 countries, we confirm that there are several efforts from multilaterals that are going on and investments that are not only in education, but specifically tackling inclusive education. In Colombia, you have UNICEF with their Learning Circles initiatives. USAID has Together We Learn. The IDB has Aprendamos Todos a Leer. In El Salvador, you have the GPE World Bank Growing Up and Learning Together. Save the Children has equitable, inclusive, and quality education for migrants. I mean, the list goes on. Haiti has the Rapid Project for Integrated Library. Honduras has also World Bank and the World Food Program that support free school meals, etc. I think that the report has an inventory of these projects. I want to turn the attention mostly in like the feedback that we got from the informants about the challenges and perhaps the pressure for more coordination between the multilateral agencies. One of the things that came across was the one-size-fits-all kind of approach to not perhaps going into the adaptation or the really co-development that is needed in each of the countries. Another thing was a narrow scope, tackling a single issue, say internet, without considering the big picture of, okay, what do we need to to provide internet and make it sustainable? Are there the basic conditions in the schools? Like, is there electricity? Is there tablets? Who's going to maintain the tablets? That type of thought. And, you know, the participants also perceived little community participation in project design and implementation. This came out both in Haiti and El Salvador, and perceptions that programs promoted by multilaterals operate more in like the short and medium term rather than thinking really about the long term.
Well, Carla, the feedback is giving a lot of things to think about. So let me try to close in a more positive way. What can be done? What are the main recommendations of the Ayala report so that we know there are all these challenges, but what can be done? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So we have thought about, I mean, the report has more than 6 recommendations, but for the purpose of the presentations, we prioritize number one, and as obvious as it seems, this is continue to invest in addressing the specific needs that marginalized groups have to access quality education. This entails from the ministries, from the government, protecting and increasing national financial commitments to the multilaterals, the international development assistance, to close the gap in education services and outcomes between the marginalized groups and the rest of the population. And this ties together with the Sustainable Development Goal number 4. It would be a direct contribution. Recommendation number 2 is on strengthening the EMIS. We talked broadly about this. USAID could play a leading role in supporting the governments in this study, in really understanding what works with their EMIS and what needs to be improved to ensure that data is consistently collected and used to make decisions for these populations. Recommendation number 3 is using and capitalizing on what we have. There is the Universal Design for Learning guidelines that could absolutely inform learning environments that are aimed at the inclusion of all learners. This is something that USAID even has developed, the UDL toolkit that could be applied to help all children read, particularly those from marginalized populations. Recommendation number 4 goes into the development of a national curriculum that is revamped or a reform of the curriculum to include the aspects that are geared to the instruction of teachers in terms of inclusivity, specifically for children that have special needs, like, for example, deaf and hard of hearing children, children that are blind. There are specific methodologies that could be used for general education teachers, as well as for teachers that want to specialize, that need to be incorporated in the curriculum for instruction. Recommendation number 5 goes into strengthening. Again, this is the part for moving from the curriculum creation to the actual training of teachers. And this could be done simultaneously, both for the in-service teachers already teaching children that hope to be in an inclusive environment, to pre-service teachers or the new teachers that are incoming into the profession, drawing on their investments in other regions. USAID could also support governments provide both general education and specific specialized education for these groups. And the final recommendation is on guaranteeing meaningful consultation, again, kind of as a response to what the stakeholders were perceiving for communities, for parents to be involved in the design of these projects, ultimately that are for their own benefit, by sharing what is it that they need, and then participating in the co-creation of their solutions. So with that said, Jose, thanks for taking the time to talk with me, and thank you for everyone for your attention.
Well, thank you, Carla. I think Mariana has something that we can interact with our audience. So please, Mariana, go ahead.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it's Nate. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I'll
Nate,
jump in here.
apologies, Nate.
No
My
problem.
apologies.
Yeah, I'm up next. So as Jose was saying, we now do have an interactive portion of the session where we're going to launch a poll. So as you all have listened to these 6 recommendations, hopefully you can see the poll popping up on your screen now. We would like you to think, which of these provided recommendations are most important to your work, or which resonate the most with you for your work? And we'd like to ask for you to please rank the recommendations from 1 to 6, 1 as most important and 6 as least important. So on this poll, if you can review the recommendations again, And I believe we also are having the recommendations put in the chat in Spanish and French. So draw your attention to the chat to read those in Spanish and French as well. And then whichever one of these priorities you feel is most important to your work or resonates most with you, you can select one for that priority. The second most important recommendation, you would select two, so on and so forth. So we'll give you all a moment to review these and put them in rank order. And then once you've done that, you can click the submit button. And you will need to put rankings for all 6 before the submit feature will open up. We had some limitations with the Zoom platform on what we were able to do with this poll. All right, give you just another moment to make your final ranking selections here. Lauren and Elizabeth, are you able to see on your end how many submissions we have to the poll so far? About half the group so far. Okay, we'll give a 10-second countdown. Okay, let's go ahead and close the poll. And if you're able to show the results, here we go. Okay, so it looks like, oh, the results vanished. There we go. Oh, they're on and off again. Yeah, it looks like just preliminary glance, absolutely a lot on the first one, prioritizing in our education investments, really standing out for sure. C looks like a pretty high response. Adopting UDL is central part of national inclusive education policies. And then we've got D and E, investing in coordinating to remove learning barriers for children with disabilities, in-service, pre-service teaching. Thank you so much for your time on this poll. This is helpful as we're making priorities and informing our work moving forward. Okay, thank you so much. I will now turn it back to Mariana to facilitate closing Q&A. Any final questions? Over to you, Mariana.
Yeah. So we have not received additional questions, but if someone has, we have 2 minutes to answer a couple of questions. If you want to unmute yourselves or you just want to add it to the chat. Let me see. Okay. I don't think. Okay.
And perhaps I just might jump in to say, you know, as you reflected on those recommendations, if you have any reflections on those in particular, or any other recommendations that you all might flag from your experience. Have a few minutes for questions and comments. Thanks.
Well, Nate, let me borrow why people are getting more. To me, particularly put higher the consultation with the marginalized groups. I think as these reports show, when we listen to them, they gave us insightful information that really complements the hard data that we can collect. But also, many of these recommendations are the result of the discussion with the key actors. So definitely, I was a little surprised that I put a little higher the consultation with these particular groups just to know what they perceive to be the barriers that they're facing. So that's my 2 cents reflection, Nate. So hopefully that triggers some additional discussion.
Yeah, great.
Thanks, Jose.
Here, go ahead, Nate, please.
I was just going to say, Pauline was letting me know I may have just been reading the results in reverse, if that was the case. My apologies. My apologies. But absolutely, thank you, Jose. I also just wanted to briefly respond here. Sander, yeah, your point in the chat about requiring more specialized micro-level programs and potential room for localization. Definitely agree with that. And back to you, Mariana.
So yeah, there is this question from Nora. On what question do panelists see the greatest need for research going forward? Yeah, where and on what questions do panelists see the greatest need on research, Jose and Carla, and Nate too?
Yeah, at least on my case, which I think is important, is on the compound effects of several of these characteristics of these marginalized groups. I think we need to understand, first of all, the impact on income poverty, on how that magnifies any of the other characteristics. You could be, I don't know, let's say it's very different, me as a migrant, with a migrant that is just coming through the jungle, no? So those 2 things are, I think, important for us to understand. But I also believe that the fact that it's still the poverty, the income poverty, the link with violence, so all of these effects, how they connect, I think is important, because we need to add, not only at the school level, but as Carla and when we were discussing, there is a lot of factors at the community level, at the household family level. In other studies that we have done, when we talk about the perception of people and the behavioral and how they make decisions, we have found that there are simpler things that can be done in terms of the big scheme of expenses that could still contribute. So to me, adding those elements that could give us a nuance and opportunities unexploited, I think those are the ones that I think we should put more resources, because definitely the gap is large, but maybe we could start having some gains if we go to these smaller levels that we can capture some of these nuances with how people make decisions about school attendance and retention.
I would complement that with going from the big picture to the very specific, to the Emmys in every country. I think that this study was about data, about trying to understand what we know and what we don't know. And we do know that in every country, there is an effort that is organized and that is coming from the government to try to collect this data, trying to identify what are the specific roadblocks within each of those Emmys, and going in a deep dive of what are some of the potential solutions. And there are actually tools to do this. And it's something that I see a lot of potential for USAID to invest and help them. This is like an effort that absolutely is sustainable, because then it will stay in the country. So, and there's doing assessments, doing research to inform is something that is feasible and that should be done.
Thank you so much, Carla and Jose, and thank you, Nate, also for joining today. So I just want to thank everyone for your attendance today. The report is going to be released very soon, so we invite you to stay tuned. We will be sending over our regular channels, the newsletter, and the LAC Hub LinkedIn page, as well as through other channels from the LAC Bureau. Also, if you are interested in other events, we invite you to join the LAC Hub and all the networks of LTLGP by scanning the QR on screen. And we just have one concluding poll at the end as you start leaving. If you can take some minutes to respond to that in order for us to improve in the upcoming events. And that's all on our side. We hope to hear from you soon again. Thank you so much, and thank you to our panelists again. Bye-bye.
Thanks.